On December 1st, 1884, the doors of the Pavilion Polychrome were flung open, and a curious public poured into the massive hall to see what all the fuss was about. The first exhibition of the Société des Artistes Indépendants was opening with a young group of rebellious artists. They were sick and tired of the establishment rejecting their works for display at the Salon, Paris' biggest and most prestigious art show. So, after years of complaining, they decided to set up their own salon. Their stated goal was to allow the artists to present their work to public judgment with complete freedom. Parisians, like most people, loved a spectacle, and Paris in the 1880s was full of spectacles. This was the Belle Epoque, after all, a time of incredible change. New technologies, new products, and new ideas were everywhere. And now the newspapers and posters were advertising a new type of art to experience. One of the biggest and most radical paintings in the show was the Bathers at Asnières. Nearly 10 feet wide and 7 feet tall, it was the first major painting of Georges Seurat, just 25 years old, and he'd been working on it for nearly 2 years. From a distance, one might have mistaken it as another Impressionist painting. Impressionism had been causing a stir for nearly 20 years now. Artists like Claude Monet, Edouard Manet, and Auguste Renoir had been the young rebels of the 1860s and 1870s, daring to challenge painterly conventions with their visible brushstrokes, saturated colors, and focus on feeling and light, rather than classical realism. But there was a lot more going on in this painting than meets the eye. Essentially, it's a big science experiment. Seurat has carefully constructed his picture with highly disciplined brushstrokes that from a distance fool our eyes into seeing colors and tones that aren't actually there on the canvas. And he's using recent discoveries in color theory to select contrasting colors to influence one another. And his choice of subjects and the way he depicts them was daring. A painting of this size would have traditionally been reserved for a great battle or historical event, or perhaps a biblical scene if it was to hang in a church. Yet Seurat depicts bathers, working-class bathers. His title states the scene is set in Asnières, a dirty industrial suburb of Paris. You can see the factories in the background. These aren't pitiable street urchins, though. These are regular, relatable people just taking a break. And yet, his subjects are totally anonymous. He's not replacing actors' faces with royalty like academia did. We can't even see most of the faces. So, this painting, huge in scale and so meticulously constructed, is a tribute to ordinary, unknown people living in the suburbs. The critics didn't quite know what to make of it. As one said, it is painted with so much conviction that it appears almost touching, and I don't quite dare poke fun at it. Of course, plenty did poke fun and moved on quickly. Little did they know that they were looking at the seeds of the next global revolution in art, Post-Impressionism. I'm Ricky Allman. I'm a professor of painting and drawing at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. I'm also an artist. I discovered Post-Impressionism while in art school in Boston and was profoundly influenced by these artists, especially Cézanne. Growing up in the Rocky Mountains, my mind was constantly imagining different shapes and patterns emerging and moving in the rocks, cliffs, and boulders. When I found out that's exactly what Cézanne was doing with Mont Saint-Victoire, I felt a strange sort of validation and excitement about my childhood fantasies. It gave me courage and inspiration to begin painting abstract mountains, which I've been doing for over 20 years now. Over the next 24 lessons, I want to take you up close into the world of the Post-Impressionists. I want to show you how they experienced the incredible change happening all around them. Science, technology, politics, religion, society, and philosophy were all being completely reimagined. This is exactly what the Post-Impressionists would do with painting. I want to talk about what caused these artists to think and feel the way they did, how it affected their artwork, and of course, we'll dig deep into the content of their paintings to see how they altered the trajectory of art forever. Modern life is complicated, confusing, and difficult to understand. One reason we value art in our lives is because artists act kind of like a sieve or a filter, sucking in inspiration from all around them and then channeling that into a unique vision and interpretation of the times, right there for us to see on the canvas or the screen. It helps us make sense of the world around us. Art has a unique way to make us see our world, our times, and ourselves in a different way. The Post-Impressionists wanted to do all that, and they didn't care what rules they broke while they did it. They pushed the boundaries of art in every direction. And some of them, like Van Gogh, Seurat, and Cezanne, have become some of the most recognizable and significant artists in Western art. It's important to realize, though, that Post-Impressionism wasn't a clear-cut movement with a distinctive style. If you know a little about your art history, you can usually pick a Rococo painting from a Renaissance one, or a Cubist painting from pop art. Post-Impressionism, though, was much more fluid, and it can be hard to define the boundaries of the movement. In fact, the term Post-Impressionism didn't even really get first used until 1910, several years after what some consider to be the end of the movement in 1905. Art historians are always trying to put artists into little boxes and categories, and it was very useful to have this new term to describe all this change that had gone on over the past 3 decades. But it's not a term that the artists themselves ever used. Some considered themselves part of much smaller movements, like the Symbolists, Nabi group, or the Neo-Impressionists. Others had ideas that were so different, they didn't really fit with anyone else. Most artists probably didn't worry about it too much and were happy to leave such questions to the academics. But despite the huge variety, there's several main themes connecting them. The first is color, vivid, unnatural colors. Many of them only recently possible through the wonders of modern chemistry. The Post-Impressionists love color in all its forms, and many use new scientific discoveries in color theory to guide their work. So science and technology helped the Post-Impressionists open up their palettes. The second is abstraction. The Post-Impressionists rejected classical realism and looked for new, less literal ways to depict the world or to convey emotions and feelings. Some, like Cezanne, played around with angles, optical science, and perspective to represent the world in a totally different way, and opened the door to the later Cubists as he did so. Others used symbols, bold lines, blocks of color, patterns, or even the physical qualities of paint itself to represent their subjects. Some, like Toulouse-Lautrec, used these new simplified forms to become early graphic designers, creating artistic posters for the mass market. And the third is their interest in non-Western art. Keep in mind that African art, Asian art, and indigenous art from all over the world were far more developed than Europe in terms of abstraction, patterning, color theory, symbolism. Western art in the 19th century was really just discovering what had been going on elsewhere for centuries. But in the late 19th century, increased international communication and the start of globalization was exposing many to the art of other places for the first time. Many of the Post-Impressionists couldn't get enough of it. Japanese art particularly was a huge influence on many. But art from Africa, South Asia, and even South America was starting to filter in and inspire European artists to incorporate elements into their own work. And finally, experimentation. The Post-Impressionists did everything they told you not to in art school. Many Post-Impressionists were self-taught with fresh eyes and new perspectives and approaches. Seurat and the Pointillists used tiny dots and intricate brushwork to construct their images. Van Gogh painted with brushstrokes so thick and heavy that the paint nearly fell off the canvas, creating incredible textures and effects. Everyone's technique was a bit different, but they were all trying to achieve the same end. Forget about the rules and find new ways to express their own personal vision. In fact, it's their individualism and unique approaches that makes Post-Impressionism so interesting to study and such a pivotal movement, because they were pioneering artists who started kicking down the doors of centuries of convention and setting art free. They helped make art about individual expression rather than realistic depiction, and as we'll see, they really did lay the foundations for modern art. We're going to cover a lot of ground in this course, and I'll be talking about both the artists and movements of the period, and also the big changes in the world that influenced their worldview. But for the rest of this first lecture, we need to start with Impressionism, which all the Post-Impressionists were either inspired by or reacted against. The Impressionists rocked the boat, and the Post-Impressionists broke the boat into 100 pieces, grabbed their own boards, and surfed off into the sunset.